Welcome to your Barbados Today Evening News Update for Thursday, July 2. A plea to Prime Ministers Mia Mottley, Dr. Ralph Gonsalves and Roosevelt Skerrit not to abandon Liat. It's coming from the Antigua and Barbuda Prime Minister Gaston Brown, who says the shareholder government should reorganize the airline and not liquidate it. More in this report from Garfield Burford of ABS Television.
Prime Minister Brown had first signalled the call for a reorganization of Liat in a Facebook post on Thursday. Hours later, members of the media received a copy of a letter Prime Minister Brown wrote to his colleague heads of government, Mia Mottley of Barbados, Roosevelt Skerrit of Dominica, and Dr. Ralph Gonsalves of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Along with Antigua and Barbuda, these three governments own most of the shares in Liat. Prime Minister Brown's message was clear. We in Antigua and Barbuda cannot abandon Liat, he says. Liat did not abandon the Caribbean people. Prime Minister Brown therefore wants them to reconsider liquidating the carrier and consider reorganizing the airline. He says he's convinced Liat 1974 Limited could be reorganized for the benefit of the Caribbean people to provide an essential air bridge and at least partially satisfy the obligations to creditors and employees. Prime Minister Brown makes it clear in the letter that it was a majority decision taken to liquidate the carrier during the meeting of shareholders, and he objected. And what if the other colleague prime ministers don't agree to reorganize? Prime Minister Brown has a plan B. The government of Antigua and Barbuda, he says, would then launch Liat 2020 Limited as soon as possible. And to show he's serious, he indicates the government has already applied to register the name. The government, he says, has also set aside $20 million in funds borrowed months ago from the Alba Bank and has secured the serious commitment of other governments and private sector partners to take up equity in the carrier. This amounts to another $20 million, he says. He says there is an open invitation to all CARICOM governments, particularly the main shareholders in the existing carrier, to participate in the ownership of the new airline, if that is indeed the route taken. Following the letter, there was this post from the Prime Minister on his Facebook page. A caption, Liat will be the predator, not the prey, under a photograph of one Caribbean airline.
Meanwhile, prominent local businessman Ralph Busy Williams, who was one of the directors in the defunct low-cost airline Redjet, suggests a new private sector-led airline is the way to go. But he insists regional governments will have to make changes to better facilitate intra-regional travel. He told Barbados Today the current system is flawed.
You need a private sector airline, which hopefully the unions won't cripple and will operate under guidelines. So the Ministry of Aviation becomes a regulator, and the private sector entity is allowed to function like a real business, not as a charity. Right now, Liat is the number one charity in Antigua. So my feeling is set the terms, set the conditions that will prevent a government-owned entity from losing money to put a private sector entity out of business, and have a change of attitude in the Ministry of Aviation, which to where the people that are running it actually understand and believe that it is the private sector that creates wealth and not government.
Approximately 8 out of 10 companies in the services sector in Barbados have reported a decrease in revenue during the COVID-19 pandemic. This was one of the main findings coming out of a Barbados Coalition of Service Industries impact study on the Barbadian services sector, which was carried out between May 22 and June 9. Presenting the findings on Wednesday during a live-streamed media conference, the BCSI's Trade and Research Officer said the average decline in revenue for companies was 66%, and as a result, most had to implement a range of measures to stay afloat.
Of this, 65% of respondents, 76% of them would have indicated that they would have had to institute some form of workforce interventions over the survey period. When we speak about workforce interventions here, we're speaking of either layoffs, short time, sharp pay, or a combination of all three. When we look in terms of the workforce interventions, we would have saw that the employers would have shown a preference for layoffs as opposed to pay cuts during the pandemic. The caveat to this is when this study was done, we would have been in a high period of lockdown. Some businesses would have been unable to operate. And with zero revenue coming in, it's very hard to keep people on the payroll.
He pledged that the BSCI would continue to help its members to recover, and he urged companies to streamline their operations without cutting staff.
Further, businesses should continue to make productive usages of their technological investments to lower their cost structure. As we go chart the path forward from COVID, business isn't going to pick back up automatically to the same point where they were. Businesses will continue to have to make things work and increase output with lower costs. Already we saw during the height of lockdown how it was possible. My only appeal is, as we go out of output of lockdown, businesses continue to operate on that premise, and as opposed to looking to see how many people we can send home, etc., we look to see how we can utilize the investments we have already made to decrease the cost structure within the organizations.
Purity Bakeries employees are back on the job after staging a work stoppage yesterday over work hours and other issues. Workers across the board took issue with management's position that they would continue working for less hours and reduced pay introduced at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. The Barbados Workers Union, the workers' bargaining agent, said the employees agreed to resume their duties on the grounds that the company agreed to reinstate the 40-hour work week guaranteed in the collective agreement between Purity and the BWU. In the meantime, both sides are to continue discussions. A St. Michael man was today remanded to Her Majesty's Prison Dodds after appearing at the District A Magistrates Court on murder charges. Police charged 33-year-old Adrian Michael Black of Thompson Gap, Codrington Hill, St. Michael, with the murder of Victor Husbands that occurred on Monday, June 29. The accused, who appeared before Magistrate Douglas Frederick, was not required to plead to the indictable offence. He is scheduled to reappear in court on Thursday, July 30.
There's regional and international news after this short break.
Barbados Today, news you can trust.
To regional news, Jamaica stands to suffer the greatest economic fallout from tourism among developing states due to COVID-19. That's according to a report released yesterday by the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. We get the details from Television Jamaica.
With the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, the global tourism sector is expected to see a significant decline. That's according to a report published by the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD. The report revealed that the world's tourism sector could lose at least 1.2 trillion or 1.5% of the global gross domestic product. It also noted that the losses could also rise to 2.2 trillion or 2.8% of the world's GDP if the break in international tourism due to COVID-19 lasts for 8 months. Jamaica stands to suffer the greatest loss in GDP at 11%. Now, senior strategist in the tourism ministry, Delano Sivright, says the impact is greater for the island based on the interconnectivity of our industries.
Tourism is a lot more interconnected than many people had assumed. People seem to lose sight of the fact that our tourism industry, the linkages has been deepening over the years, which is also a good thing for Jamaica. But yes, it also means that we must at all times continue to develop other options as it relates to our economy. But the fact is, tourism has the biggest potential for growth.
It's not that we are losing more money than other countries. Obviously, United States, France, and those countries will lose a lot more. But Jamaica, in terms of its dependency on tourism, has lost a lot.
But despite the gloomy picture, Mr. Sivright believes that things will rebound in the near future.
But we have accepted the fact that we have to open up, but we have to open up cautiously. And we're very confident that certainly within a year or so, tourism will come back to appreciated, so to good levels that are sustainable, and we will go on a surge essentially after a year or so back to the numbers that we had pre-COVID-19.
On the international scene, more than 36 U.S. states are seeing a rise in COVID-19 cases, according to an analysis done by Reuters. It's the latest grim sign that the coronavirus pandemic, once thought to be waning, is again spreading rapidly.
42-year-old Ricardo Aguirre of Arizona says his entire family is infected with the coronavirus. His wife, his kids, his parents, and himself. Even worse, 5 members of his extended family have died.
We've been through hell and back.
In California, 27-year-old Christian Jaramillo says he was bedridden for days after contracting the virus.
It was started out with a fever and a lot of shivers, a lot of chills.
He believes he caught the virus at a bar when they were given the green light to reopen. They are the new faces of coronavirus in the United States, young and old, living in places that have emerged as the country's newest hotspots for a virus that has taken the lives of more than 128,000 Americans. With the record surge in new infections across the West and South, an overwhelming demand for testing. From Miami to Houston, people are lining up, sometimes for hours.
It was about a 3-hour wait and they ran out of tests.
At this site in Houston, the line even spilling out onto a nearby freeway. In Texas, where the number of new cases jumped to a one-day record of nearly 7,000 this week, Houston hospitals said beds were quickly filling up with COVID-19 patients. Dr. Peter Hotez, a dean at the Baylor College of Medicine, painted a grim picture of the virus's spread in the city.
And now we're seeing this massive relapse, this resurgence, and it's happening in all the major metro areas of Texas, and it's very alarming. The rate of acceleration is extreme. We're seeing a daily dramatic increase, almost a vertical slope, what we call an exponential curve with some of the models saying that we may be at 4,000 cases a day in Houston by early middle July. So that would be catastrophic for the city. So this is a pretty bad scenario.
That's news, but for the very latest, visit our website at www.barbadostoday.bb. You can also subscribe to our e-paper, email updates, or like us on Facebook, and sign up for our breaking news alerts via WhatsApp. We're also on Izumi Media and bus terminals, as well as screenplay at supermarkets and gas stations near you. You can also hear us on Mix 96.9 FM and Capital Media HD 99.3 FM.